In some countries, eating the wrong animal's meat will not just upset your neighbors. It can get you arrested. It can get you disowned by your own family. In a few places, throughout history, it has gotten people killed. Food should be the simplest thing in the world. And yet, somehow, one wrong bite has started riots. So here is a strange question to sit with for a moment. Is there a single meat, anywhere on earth, that almost nobody actually forbids? You probably eat more than one kind of meat already. Chicken. Maybe pork. So the real question buried inside today's topic is not really, why do we only eat one animal? It is something stranger and honestly more interesting. Why does it sometimes feel like goat is the one meat that slips past every single objection, everywhere, while almost every other meat gets rejected by someone, somewhere, for reasons that have nothing to do with taste at all? To answer that, you first have to understand something most people never think about. Every major meat on earth carries baggage. Real, serious, deeply held baggage, tied to religion, culture, and history. Start with beef. In Hinduism, practiced by over 1 billion people, cows are considered sacred. Not simply respected. Sacred, protected, and in many regions of India, legally shielded from slaughter entirely. For a huge percentage of the global population, a plate of beef is not just an unusual choice. It is something close to unthinkable. Now think about pork. In Islam, followed by roughly 2 billion people worldwide, pork is explicitly forbidden, described directly in religious text as unclean. In Judaism, the same restriction exists, going back thousands of years, embedded in dietary law that observant Jewish communities still follow today. Between those two religions alone, pork becomes off-limits for close to 1/4 of the entire human species. So already, two of the most commonly eaten meats in Western supermarkets, beef and pork, are each rejected outright by enormous portions of humanity. Not disliked. Forbidden. What about chicken? Surely that one is safe. Mostly. But even chicken carries smaller, more localized restrictions in certain religious and cultural contexts, and in parts of the world, chicken farming itself intersects with strict rules about how the animal must be raised and slaughtered before it becomes acceptable to eat at all. Now here is where the story gets genuinely strange. What about meats that seem completely ordinary in one culture and completely horrifying in another? Horse meat is eaten comfortably across parts of continental Europe and Central Asia. In the United States and the United Kingdom, the same meat triggers instant, visceral discomfort in most people, treated less like food and more like a taboo you are not supposed to even joke about. Dog meat, historically consumed in specific regions of East Asia, provokes an even stronger reaction across most of the Western world, treated not just as unusual, but as something close to morally unacceptable. So pause for a second and really absorb what is happening here. Nearly every major meat humans eat is rejected by someone, somewhere, often by enormous populations, for reasons rooted in religion, culture, or deep emotional attachment to a specific animal. Which brings us back to goat. Search across every major world religion, every dominant cultural tradition, every large population center on the planet, and something becomes obvious almost immediately: goat meat does not appear on hardly any of these forbidden lists. Islam permits it. Judaism permits it, under proper preparation. Hinduism, while protective of cows specifically, does not extend that same sacred status to goats. Christianity places no dietary restriction on it whatsoever. There is no major Western taboo around it, comparable to horse or dog meat. There is no widespread religious prohibition, comparable to pork. Goat is not the most eaten meat on the planet. Chicken and pork both outproduce it globally by enormous margins. But when you specifically measure how many people are religiously or culturally forbidden from eating it, goat sits in an almost unique position, nearly universally permitted, nearly everywhere, by nearly everyone. So why does that matter so much? Why does one animal managing to avoid nearly every taboo actually change anything? Because it explains something you have probably noticed without ever putting words to it. Goat meat quietly shows up almost everywhere, across wildly different cultures that agree on almost nothing else. In the Middle East, goat is a staple, served at everyday meals and major celebrations alike. Across large parts of Africa, goat is one of the single most common sources of meat, prized specifically because of how easily it fits into diverse religious households living side by side. In the Caribbean, curried goat is a defining national dish in multiple countries. In South Asia, goat meat, often labeled mutton in local markets, is a dominant choice precisely because it avoids the religious complications tied to both beef and pork in a region shared by Hindu, Muslim, and other communities. Notice the pattern forming here. In regions where multiple religions and cultures live closely together, goat repeatedly becomes the safe, shared, uncontroversial option. Not because it is anyone's single favorite meat, because it is almost nobody's forbidden meat. That is a genuinely rare position for any food to occupy. Now here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. If goat avoids nearly every religious restriction, why doesn't it dominate Western countries the same way chicken and beef do? This is where the story shifts from religion into something far more practical: economics and the physical biology of the animal itself. Goats are small. A single goat produces a fraction of the usable meat you get from a single cow. That single fact changes everything about how efficiently goat meat can be raised, processed, and sold at the massive industrial scale that dominates Western meat production. Cattle farming can be automated, standardized, and scaled into facilities processing enormous volumes with relatively few animals. Goat farming, by contrast, typically remains smaller, more localized, often tied to traditional herding practices that never fully transitioned into the same kind of industrial system that transformed beef, pork, and chicken into cheap, mass-produced commodities across wealthy Western economies. So even though goat avoids nearly every cultural objection that limits other meats, it ran into a completely different obstacle in specific regions of the world. It was simply never built into the industrial supply chain the same way. Put those two forces together, and the full picture finally comes into focus. Where multiple religions and cultures share the same geographic space, goat became the obvious, practical, universally acceptable choice, adopted deliberately because it solved a real social problem. Where industrial-scale meat production took over instead, in wealthier Western nations with less religious dietary friction to navigate, cattle, pigs, and chickens simply scaled faster, cheaper, and bigger, leaving goat behind as a niche, specialty product instead of an everyday staple. Neither outcome has much to do with taste. Both outcomes have everything to do with which obstacles each region actually needed to solve. So when you ask why it can feel like goat is somehow the only meat that fits everywhere, here is the real, complete answer. Goat is not the only meat humans eat. It is the meat that comes closest to solving a problem every other popular meat creates somewhere on Earth. Beef offends 1 billion Hindus. Pork is forbidden to roughly 2 billion Muslims and Jews combined. Horse and dog meat trigger visceral rejection across huge portions of the Western world. Goat, almost uniquely, avoids nearly all of it. That is not a coincidence, and it is not really about goat itself being special. It is about every other major meat carrying some kind of cultural cost that goat simply does not carry, in nearly as many places, for nearly as many people. The next time you see goat on a menu, in a curry, in a stew, roasted whole at a celebration somewhere in the world, you are not looking at some obscure, unusual choice. You are looking at the single meat that came closest to something almost no other food on Earth manages, being acceptable to nearly everyone, nearly everywhere, all at once. And that is not an accident of flavor. That is thousands of years of religion, culture, and history quietly working themselves out, one shared meal at a time.